Hi, everyone. I'm Ken Pisani. I'm Vice Chair of the Writers Education Committee, and I thank you for being here for tonight's jam-packed panel to explore screenwriting democracy. I can't think of a more timely subject in these terrifying and beyond satirization times. But thank you for joining us. I'll start with a few thank yous. Committee co-chairs Brian, Gary, and Cynthia Riddle, our invaluable WGA liaison, Greg Mitchell, and our panelists and participants tonight who you'll meet throughout the evening, and especially event chair and moderator Devra Maza. I know right now it looks like just me and Devra, but that would be false advertising. Trust me, it gets better. Just a brief plug for the Writers Education Committee. This is one of a lot of great panels we put on all year long. Our goal is to help working writers. Think about joining us at a future meeting. Our next meeting is September 11th. It'll be a hybrid Zoom meeting and live at the Guild's NPR room, so I hope you'll join us. Moderating tonight is Devra Maza. Devra is a screenwriter, filmmaker, and journalist. She's earned multiple awards and more than 50 nominations for her work in the Los Angeles Times, USA Today, LA Daily News, and HuffPost. Just between her vast experience as a journalist, as a screenwriter, and a deep knowledge of film history, and her passion for social justice, she's really the perfect moderator for tonight's topic. This is an event that she pitched and championed and worked diligently to bring to you tonight. So now, without further ado, because who needs too much ado, take it away, Devra.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ken Pisani, and for the support of everyone at the Writers Education Committee. I'm very grateful. So welcome to Screenwriting Democracy, Movies and Shows on Politics, Media, and Civil Rights for Our Time. It's an extremely important thing to do now as we see our country completely changing. As everyone knows who's received the program, which is attached to your email for the Zoom link, I'm going to reread that quote from Volodymyr Zelensky. President Zelensky said at the opening ceremony of the 2022 Cannes Film Festival, he was referring to Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator film. And he said, Chaplin, dictator, did not destroy the real dictator. But thanks to him, cinema did not stay silent. And so that is our agenda tonight, to not stay silent. And we have an incredible array of wonderful panelists here to weigh in on all kinds of aspects of what's happening in our democracy today. Now let's meet our panelists. They're also in the program today, and you can read more about them. They're all Oscar or Emmy or Writers Guild or NAACP or millions of awards. If I had to just read their awards, we'd be here all day. So I'm just going to introduce them to you right now so that you can meet them and say hi. So panelists, come on screen. There we go. So many wonderful faces. So I don't know if everyone's seeing the same screen I am, but I'm going to go in order from the top. So we have Winnie Holzman is here from Wicked and Wicked for Good, which is coming up. Brigitte Muñoz-Liebowitz is here from Gordita Chronicles and One Day at a Time. We have Daniel Stiepleman here from On the Basis of Sex and Out of My Mind. We have David Grae, who's going to talk about some very important episodes from Madam Secretary. We have Josh Singer, who did The Post and Spotlight and The Fifth Estate, which I think is relevant today. We have Dustin Lance Black. Thank you, Lance, for coming. We have, he has done, you saw those clips from both Rustin and, of course, Milk. We have Amy Chozick, who did The Girls on the Bus, as well as is the author of Chasing Hillary, which we'll talk a little bit about. Alex Gregory is here from White House Plumbers, Veep, which is like one of my all-time favorite shows ever, and is currently on The Studio. Yahlin Chang is here. She's the showrunner from The Handmaid's Tale, but also Supergirl. We need more Supergirls right now. Dan Gilroy is here from Andor. We're going to talk specifically about his episodes. Peter, I'm going to mess your last name. You just told me how, and
you got it. Huyck.
Say it. hike, as in taking a hike, but lucky for us, he's staying around. He's also on the studio now and also was on Veep and as well on White House Plumbers. Paris Qualles is here. I know how to say his last name because it sounds like quality, and everything he does is. So he did the Rosa Parks Story as well as Tuskegee Airmen, and everyone should check out his award-winning version of Raisin in the Sun as well. And that's our panel. So thank you very much. We're going to meet them all individually soon, and then we'll see them all come back later. Please check your programs for more information of their illustrious careers. It's amazing. So first, we're going to deal with our first segment, which is about the White House, government and the White House, when it works for us and serves the people as it should, when it works against us because it serves itself. George Orwell, of course, wrote in 1984, "He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past." This is part 1, chapter 3. In 1949, he wrote this. It's very indicative of a headline we now had last week, which is White House to vet Smithsonian exhibits to fit Trump's historical vision. So we're on our road to what this is. Joining me today for this segment is Alex Gregory and Peter Huyck, who, as I mentioned, did both White House Plumbers, their movie, and Veep, which everyone should watch all of those episodes over and over again. And also they're on the studio now, which doesn't seem like it's government, but it feels like it's a microcosm of pretty much the same tyrannical setup. So my first question to you guys, what research, since you're writing pretty much about dysfunctional governments, a dysfunctional White House, a dysfunctional people with unbridled ambition who are both inept and criminal, what research did you do to make sure you figured out how it's supposed to work so that you could highlight how it doesn't?
Well, what we did was we really looked into the lives of these guys. I mean, the interesting thing was that we originally set out to talk about, because this is pre-January 6th, to talk about how trauma was at the root of a lot of extremism. And there was one director when we were looking for directors who said, "I think you're being too kind to these guys. They're monsters." And we're like, yeah, but in order to tell a cautionary tale, you kind of have to show how a human being can go this way. And so then when January 6th happened, the whole extremism thing really gave it a lot more weight. But the thing is White House Plumbers is about the plumbers, not so much the White House. So ideally, the White House doesn't abuse power. It functions as a benevolent parent. It doesn't attempt to scare or shame or control. It's there supposed to support. It's supposed to resolve conflicts as opposed to start them and pick fights with everyone. So Plumbers was about people who fanatically believe in a cause to the detriment of the country, their families, themselves, everyone around them. And so that's what that was. And so it was really a deep dive into these guys' lives and how their fanaticism cost them their families, their jobs, landed them in jail. And the crazy thing is, well, it seemed like a cautionary tale for all the January 6th people, except Nixon didn't come to the rescue of these guys, and Trump did, which is sickening. And indicative of how pardons can be used to basically convince people to commit crimes on behalf of the White House, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and thinking about that, doing research into the White House and politics and how it all worked, before White House Plumbers, we did a bunch of years writing and producing the show Veep, which was a comedic take on it, but a lot of it was supposed to be very based in reality. And we very much did a lot of research on that show where we would go to DC. We would meet with a lot of staffers inside the White House. We met with Obama's speechwriters and assistants all the way up to, congressmen, senators. We really would do only before writing any season of Veep. We would just have months of meetings fascinating. And what was interesting was change in the dynamic before and after 2016, because we were initially meeting with people that we wouldn't have been voting for, John McCain or Mitt Romney, but you would have these meetings, you would think, well, that I don't agree with them, but they seem like pretty reasonable, thoughtful, responsible people. And Mitt Romney came in with his wife to the Veep writers' room with Julia and all of us and talked for 3 hours, and he left, and we all said, well, not a single person here was going to vote for him over Obama, but that's a really solid person, and if he were the president, I would think he would be a responsible, respectable person. And then, writing that show was all about, the comedy came from people behaving badly in politics. And then with the advent of Trump and kind of the extremism, it became harder and harder to seem funny. I think that show, I was glad we got to do most of it before the political climate really changed.
Well, because the stakes of Veep were always shame. It was like, oh no, if we don't fix this, we'll look stupid, or we'll look awful, or like bad people. And now they wear stupidity and cruelty as a badge of honor. That's what made Veep impossible to do in the Trump era is, well, you have people forget about owning mistakes. They're waving their mistakes like a flag. So satire is kind of dead in that regard.
The clip that I used about her saying, I'll destroy you in a way so creative they'll honor me for it at the Kennedy Center. Now they can. Now that is because he took over it. And the people he's going to honor are, like you said, well, not speaking for those, but, fanatics or people that are turning a blind eye to the suffering of other people. Otherwise, why would you associate yourself with this? So, so one more quote. The greatest danger to American freedom is government that ignores the Constitution. That's by Thomas Jefferson. He was reputed to also be a good writer. Let's move on to our next segment. And we'll see Alex and Peter back in a minute or
see you guys.
A little bit. Going on to prejudice and the power of protest. Again, this is something that I think is maybe the most important thing, one of the most important things we'll talk about today, because protesting is how you change laws, how you change the country. And here's the quote for this. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. That's by Holocaust survivor, Nobel Peace Prize winner, or Pulitzer Prize winner, Elie Wiesel. And this from Hannah Arendt, who was a German philosopher. She wrote this, I think, in 1949. The death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most telling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. We have with us Dustin Lance Black of Milk and Rustin, and Paris Qualles, who did the Rosa Parks Story, Tuskegee Airmen. And so first I want to start with Lance, because I want to talk about how prejudice can be fought specifically with people who organize big movements and change our country that way. Both Harvey Milk and in the movie Rustin, you had a Black gay man who organized the whole march for Martin Luther King. It changed so much. How do those films inspire us now, and what can we learn from this, and what should we do to emulate them?
Oh, wow. First of all, Paris, I'm a huge fan. It's an honor to be here with you, so thank you. You might have to cover for me that our kids started school this week, so they've already brought home neurovirus, and I haven't, I don't want to tell you where I am every 10 minutes. If you had kids, you know what that one feels like.
I do.
Yeah. Listen, these two men had a political philosophy that was all about addition, not subtraction or division. Sounds easy, sounds simple. It's not. It's hard. And we've made a lot of, well-meaning, introspective missteps in the past, decade or two in that investigation of ourselves and our differences, which is meaningful and important. At times, we've let it divide us a bit. And these were guys who really firmly believed that locking arms, coalition building, even when it was incredibly uncomfortable, was the path to a more fair, a more just country. And so that kind of organizing takes making friends in uncomfortable places sometimes. I often say, Harvey, one of the most unexpected alliances he made was with union truck drivers. And he had to go to them and say, hey, listen, I know you don't like us. I know you call us faggot, you call us this, you call us that, you make fun of us. But we drink a lot of Coors beer, and I know they're not paying you a living wage. Why don't we put Coors out of business? And if we do that, maybe you'll give a couple of us jobs. And it worked. Coors caved. They fell from number one and started paying a living wage. And to this day, we've had the support of unions and sort of, the LGBT equality fight. Bayard was a minority in so many ways. I mean, not just that he was black, but he was gay, he was a Quaker, he was the other, he was outside of the others, he was the other among others. And he understood that survival meant, hey, as he's the kind of guy to say, I probably have it worse than anybody else, but he had an understanding that you don't get a gold medal for proving you've got it the worst. You get the gold medal having it the worst and still being willing to lock arms. And still being willing to figure out how to build those coalitions that create power. We live in for now, we live in a democracy. That means we have to get to 50.1%. No minority can do that. It just doesn't work. The math ain't there. And so I think both men inspired me greatly. Because as a queer Mormon, ex-Mormon kid from Texas who grew up in the military, I knew I was too different. And I knew I couldn't win that battle alone. And so my mission in my work is to demonstrate the power of coalition building. And I think it's something a young generation can learn from. Investigate your differences. They're valuable. Understand how a system treats you unfairly. Understand how you have it worse than other people. Then stand up and lock arms. And find your brothers and your sisters and your families in these movements, because we need each other right now.
And what's interesting about that whole lesson is that the other side has made a coalition. So whether they're Christo-fascists, whether it's to put Russia's agenda to destroy democracies worldwide and infiltrate ours, whether it's the NRA, whether it's all the ones that want to take over our democracy just to make money off AI or put this into a surveillance state. They own all our data now. They're all working together, hand in hand. And so we need to do the same. And so I'm going to turn to Paris now, because your film shows specifically how even one person with a brave moment can make a huge difference and galvanize those movements when they're not in the position to organize hundreds and thousands of people, that sometimes one action can do that. And I want to talk about Rosa Parks specifically, because I don't think a lot of people know what that history is, which is she didn't just refuse to give her seat up. She was sitting in a section that was designated as colored. And the rule there was that if the white section filled up, then they were supposed to get up too. So she was already in an area where she was discriminated against, that forced her in. And when she finally said, nope, I'm keeping that seat, that whole community got up and stood up behind her. So Paris, talk to us about the value of individual brave acts. They're hard to come by, but they matter so much.
Well, particularly when that brave act has personal consequences. Rosa, when she did her act on the bus, Rosa was not an innocent seamstress, as was the myth for many, many years. She was the secretary of the NAACP at the time. She knew exactly what the stakes were. They were looking for somebody, the local Montgomery NAACP, they were looking for somebody who would challenge the system. And about 6 or 7 months before Rosa Parks incident, in December, I think, of '58, there was a woman named Claudette, who was a young 15, 16-year-old girl who did the exact same thing. She was tired, she was pregnant, and she refused to get up. And the NAACP thought that she would be their test subject that she could use. And Rosa sat through all the meetings when this occurred, and they decided no, because the fact that she was pregnant, they could not use her. So they had to set that aside. Rosa's time came around, and when she decided to take her stand on the bus, she had no idea what was going to happen. She and her husband Raymond, they were not hardly wealthy people. They were very little known, but she knew what the consequences were going to be. She didn't know what they would become. Raymond, her husband, was not behind her. He did not want her to do this. So in fashioning what an individual, the impact that they can have, it's not just what they become, because we see Rosa as this mythic creature. And in writing the movie, I wanted to dig deeper than that. I wanted to find Rosa Parks the person, because that's really what humanizes. That's what allows the average person to see themselves in somebody who takes an extraordinary step. So, it's the proverbial pebble in the pond, and then the ripple effect. When Rosa made her stand, and then the city galvanized behind her, and then Martin Luther King shows up. Martin was he was a junior minister from Atlanta. No one knew who he was. And it wasn't until that's where he really sort of made his bones, during the process, during the protests, the bus boycotts, which is what really rippled. And it rippled beyond Montgomery, Alabama. It rippled beyond the state. It rippled nationally. So yes, one person can actually do that, but they have to have it within them. They have to find that spark that you can ignite kind of this movement. And Rosa did that. She accomplished even beyond, and it ultimately it nearly destroyed the marriage. They were in fear. She lost their jobs. They were shooting at the house at night, and she ultimately had to flee the city for Detroit. And the irony of ironies was when we did the movie, and I found Rosa in Detroit. For a few years prior to that, she was living almost destitute in Detroit, and pretty much everyone had forgotten, although the nation as a whole benefited greatly from what she did. And then, it came around, and corporate benefactors, helped her. But it just goes to show you how transient, movements can be, and how a spark that's lit, it's like any fuse. You can take a 20-foot fuse to a stick of dynamite, and that fuse will burn, but then it will stop. It can often stop, and then there has to be a movement to keep that fuse going. We're at that inflection point today, I believe, with what's going on in Washington. We need fuses lit.
Yes.
We need Rosa Parks to spring from many different communities and light those fuses, because that's the only way we're going to pull ourselves out of this morass.
Yeah. And as Lance says, those fuses then need to be joined together. We need to have a coalition of those fuses so that we can all move on and go together arm in arm and stand up for what's going to be left of our democracy. We've got to take it back.
Well, I think we should, I'll be brief, but we should be awfully greedy with our power right now as writers, as filmmakers, and we should utilize it. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we're far off from the 1950s and having, say, the Hollywood 10 again. I think it's going to be the Hollywood 100 coming soon. There will be bans on filmmakers who tell the truth. And so the way to beat that is to become the Hollywood 10,000. And every single person who's a writer who's on this, who's listening to this, who's on the panel with this, cause some good fucking trouble right now. Right. That's right. Write what makes your gut shake.
Be aggressive. That's what you've got to do. We need our democratic politicians. We need the party to become aggressive. If there's nothing good that's come out of this administration, it's that there is an aggression that will change things that this country has not seen before. So if there's anything, and Donald Trump has taught me nothing good, but if there's one thing that he did teach America, is that aggressive politics make change. And that's what liberal, progressives, even moderates need to recognize and understand.
Oh, yeah.
Is that we need to, it can't be business as usual. When this administration is gone, when they are history, what's going to follow? We can't go back to Biden's years even. We can't go back to Obama. We've got to push. We've got to be aggressive. We've got to find the fuses where they are and light them.
Oh, I love you, Parrot. Yeah, I got to sit with John Lewis to make Rustin for a while, and he just was saying, make good trouble, make big trouble, make better trouble. Come on, baby.
That's what you do.
If you're afraid you're writing something that's going to get you banned, if you're afraid you're writing something that's going to get you in trouble, God damn it, write that shit.
You're doing the right thing. You've made the right decision.
And I want to point out that in October, the Supreme Court will be hearing what's left of the Voting Rights Act. Since you mentioned John Lewis, they already gutted Section 5. They will turn over Section 2. That's all that's left. And then the gerrymandering will be a free-for-all. This is, like I said, a coalition of things we're fighting. We do not have free and fair elections anymore. We didn't have it last time. There were low-level satellites. There were bomb threats from Russia. There are anomalies right now that everybody can go look at, that were in Pennsylvania, New York, and different swing states. They just don't all vote down ballot and then leave President blank. All those votes that were switched in a 15-minute span in Pennsylvania. There's a lot to look at. So people that are waiting for, we'll just vote them out because we don't want to lose our health insurance or food, you can't wait for that. You have to act now.
You're about to lose a lot more.
That's right. And with that, we're going to have to move on to the next segment, but I'm going to see you two later at the end. So keep all those good thoughts for us. And now we're going to turn to immigrants and human rights. And here is a quote to introduce that section. This is heartbreaking to read, but it's accurate to our time. Terrible things are happening outside. Poor, helpless people are being dragged out of their homes. Families are torn apart. Men, women, and children are separated. Children come home from school to find that their parents have disappeared. This is from a book called Diary of a Young Girl. It is, of course, Anne Frank. And this is her entry for January 13th, 1943. She was dead by February 1945. Everything she writes in this quote is happening right now. A child was pulled out of math class last week. Kids are coming home to find their parents missing. They're getting pulled out of Home Depot or mostly out of courts because they know when immigrants are following the legal process, when they are legally allowed to be here as permanent residents, that's who they're kidnapping. And we do have a secret police because we have armed, masked men. And what really is scary is everybody who watched every bit of January 6th some time back saw that there were people there with Confederate flags and bear spray and Camp Auschwitz t-shirts. And those are the people, the pardoned people, who are now armed and masked. So I was going to go to Brigitte first on this, but this is such a weird segue. So I think I'll go to David first, and then we'll come back for a positive note for Brigitte. But David did Madam Secretary. He was a co-showrunner on that. There's a two-part episode that I specifically wanted to speak to David about. You saw that little bit of film that was Asylum, por favor. That's from that episode. That was years ago during the first term about family separation. In fact, that's the name of that two-part episode. We never thought it would be even worse than that, but it is. So David, tell us about how important TV is, streaming is, movies are, when you can address a current event like that and come to the table and have your Madam Secretary fight those people who, like Hannah Arendt said, just look the other way or are doing for politics. They don't care. Their empathy is gone. David, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think TV at its best can do what Paris and Lance were talking about. Madam Secretary had an arc. Alex and Peter talked about how Veep, they couldn't do Veep, when Trump became president. But Madam Secretary, I feel, really took off because we found our voice in showing what good government is. Obviously, our show took place in an alternate universe. There was no President Trump. There was President Keith Carradine and Secretary of State Taya Leone. But we put issues on their feet. So yes, and we did family separation, and that was our 100th episode. The issue meant so much to us, and we had to figure out a way to do it with the Secretary of State, because obviously, what we did, we weren't doing a show about the president, but what we did was our president wouldn't be separating people, so we had the governor of Arizona, a border state, was enforcing. He was separating families at the border, and we showed our Secretary of State making good trouble, going down, seeing the conditions the kids were in, speaking up against it, and the governor got so infuriated that he threw her in prison. And then when she refused to take a plea deal like her lawyer suggested she should, she was going to get put in prison. And but the judge let her off. The judge said, "I'm not going to put you in prison. You're the Secretary of State." But she said, "No, until every child is out of those cages, I'm staying in prison." Now, this is a fantasy. It's television. But it's giving, we thought we described the whole issue. We gave viewers an understanding of how the politics of it all worked, but also what a good person would do, what a decent person would do. And we did this on many issues. We did an episode that was basically a manual on Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. What to do if a president is acting in a crazy way. And we had to give our president, who was a good person, a brain tumor in order to achieve that. That was pushing against his frontal lobe and making him act crazy. And on down the line, we did an episode called Deep Fake back in 2019. And all these issues, are coming to the fore. And I look at it as putting it out there. One episode of television, a few episodes of television, multiple episodes aren't going to change the world. But it's like raindrops falling in a bucket, and you got to fill that bucket. And millions of people saw these episodes, and I think we got to keep doing it. We got to keep hitting hard, like Paris and Lance were saying.
And what's wonderful about that, and shouldn't be necessary, but when the legacy media is so owned and compromised that they're not putting out the news that you need to know, what you just described, the research that goes into the family separation, what they're doing, if at least talk about building empathy, we know that to write fiction, it has to be grounded in some research. Screenwriters do tremendous research, and then you make the world real, so that viewers don't say, "Well, that would never happen," but you would say, "Yeah, that's the world we live in. This is what the stakes are," and now we can follow the fictional characters and see what they have to deal with. So, in a way, you're right. It's 100% necessary, like Lance said, to tell these stories and use our gifts as writers. I want to turn to Brigitte. who, to me, is a prime example of how to write positive portrayals that are necessary to get on TV, because to have empathy, apparently you need to find people relatable to you, because apparently it's not a natural thing if someone doesn't look like you or have your same religion or your same background or your same race. I am very opposed to using the phrase humanize. We shouldn't have to humanize human beings. You
Well,
know?
I like the
but-
phrase three-dimensionalize.
Yeah, and what I want to talk about specifically for Gordita Chronicles, which if anyone hasn't seen it, you can find it online. It's got some really cool laugh out loud moments in it. It was a pleasure to watch. I watched the whole thing in like a sitting, and it's addictive. And but what you did that was so masterful is in the format of a comedy. You had this immigrant family dealing with prejudice that they would find at work, in school, in grocery store shopping, in their neighborhoods, but you didn't stop laughing, and yet you didn't ever miss the point that these sometimes microaggressions, sometimes overt prejudices were there. And for everyone who writes comedy, who's watching this, Brigitte and her show put on a masterclass there. So talk to us about putting that through.
Yeah, so well, I think every time that you saw something like that on the screen, we had a room that was, I think, like 80% immigrants or children of immigrants, and those stories come from our own lives and our families' lives. And so I think there's a reason those ring true, is because they happen. But actually our focus wasn't to show the prejudice or the microaggressions per se. What we really wanted to do, as I said before, was three-dimensionalize us and our community, because and this is, and it's, you know, what everything that's happening is horrible, and whether we're talking about like drug trafficking, human trafficking, what's happening now with people being deported and detained, but that is unfortunately what people think of when they think of a Latinx community and when they think of an immigrant. And there's so much more to those people and our communities, and that's what we really wanted to show, because we felt like, gee, if people could get to know us, they might actually like us and want us to hang out in this country with them. And to also show the positive aspects of immigrating and integrating in a community, and the victories and the joys that come with it. And, you know, one of the tools that we used to try to get the pill and the cheese, so to speak, was that we used a familiar format. John Hughes played a huge influence in the look of the show and the types of stories we were telling. All American aesthetics, all American stories, but with immigrants in that place, so that there was something familiar about what you were consuming. You're like, I don't know why this feels right, even though it's partly in Spanish. And I think, you know, we had to try every which way to make that connection. And I think we succeeded. I think the same thing is true with One Day at a Time. Now, that's not my creation. I just got to work on it. But I think Norman Lear and Gloria Calderon-Kellett and Mike Royce hit the nail on the head by using that multicam format, by using humor, by telling those stories that everyone can relate to. And I think sort of like stopping the problem before it starts, that's sort of what we were hoping to do, is like really make it into the hearts of anybody watching this, so that in other opportunities, when you're faced with an opportunity or a chance to be prejudiced, you're maybe not. And you think about the entire person. And I don't remember who said this. It might have been the Dalai Lama. Sorry if I'm quoting the wrong person. But when you look at a person, there's a whole universe there that we don't even know about, that we can't even imagine. And everyone is carrying a burden we know nothing about. And we wanted to show you what those burdens, those joys, those victories, all of that might look like. So that was our strategy.
Wow. Well put. It's should still be on the air. That's all.
It's on Hulu and Disney Plus and Tubi.
Yes, it's on Tubi too, but I mean new seasons.
Oh, I know. Well, we were actually, to speak about censorship, I fully believe that that's what happened with those shows that got pulled first off HBO Max. The shows that got pulled were shows about people of color and part of the LGBTQ community. And I think that was not fitting for the agenda of that particular regime.
Yeah, that's pretty much what everybody knows, and that's what's so disturbing. So as much as we want to make, I love what, was it Lance who said it? Write it anyway. Write anyway. I didn't have time today, but I did speak to an exec at one of my favorite execs, studio execs, and she said, you know, even if it doesn't fit the agenda, even if it's not the mandate, there are film execs and show execs in place who are going to read it. If it's a good script, we might not be able to get it greenlit, but we will advocate for it. So keep writing what you need to write.
Yeah,
And,
I think the comedy version or my version of Good Trouble is to sneak it in. Get that spinach and the brownies. Like really, if you can't get it in by being honest and authentic and straightforward, trick them.
Well, that's what we did, you know, on Madam Secretary. We thought of it as civic-tainment, and we thought of it exactly like that, Bridget, getting this,
Love that.
because we had to have super exciting episodes. So we had like
Perfect.
a season opener where the White House was attacked and there was an explosion, and it turns out it was, and we thought it was international terrorism, but it turns out it was right-wing nationalists, you know, militias, and we got to do a speech about patriotism versus nationalism, and 70 million people having died in World War II because they bought into nationalism and fascism, and so that's a really good point.
Okay, we have to go to the next segment, but when we come to the end, David's going to tell one of my favorite stories from Madam Secretary, maybe from E Pluribus Unum, that one. Yeah. Okay. So thank you. We'll see you both back at the end. And now we're moving on to freedom of the press and media moguls. And this one is something, as a journalist, I have a great passion to discuss. And I'm very lucky to have two wonderful writers with us to discuss it. So Josh Singer did both The Post and Spotlight, and something called The Fifth State, which I also want to talk about. And Amy Chozick, you know her from one of those HBO shows, The Girls on the Bus, which was inspired by her own book, which I laughed out loud reading, called Chasing Hillary, about her time on the campaign trail with Hillary Clinton during that election. And she was doing that for the New York Times. So she also has vast experience as a journalist too, to bring to this. So first, I want to throw it to Josh to talk about, you got to research and write about two newspapers who are actually doing investigative work, because for me, the gold standard had always been All the President's Men, and it's what every journalist needs to watch just to see that there's no such thing as one source says who's unnamed. You need a second one, you need corroboration. The length of time it took for them to unravel Watergate took so much legwork and took so much having a paper, an editor, and an owner behind you who lets you stay on the payroll while you're doing all that. You got to show some of that in The Post and Spotlight. So talk to us about, you know, what a press is supposed to look like and what it was like researching those.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here with Amy, who, you know, I just get to write about journalists, but I always have really wanted to be one. So I'm very much interested to hear what she has to say. You know, I'm just a storyteller. I love doing research. And I got to spend a lot of time with journalists. I really do enjoy listening to them, and seeing how, you know, what makes a good journalist and what makes a good publisher. You know, if you think about it, Spotlight was really about, you know, how journalists do their jobs. Tommy McCarthy and I were always really interested in sort of the blue collar nature of journalists and how that job is not, you know, glamorous, but it's really about, you know, pushing and being aggressive, like a lot of people have said tonight, and holding, you know, the powerful responsible. And then separately, The Post was about publishers and how really, you know, the jobs of publishers are really to stand behind their journalists and support them, which sadly we've seen certain publishers like Mr. Bezos take, I think the other road. But what's interesting to me about both Spotlight and the Post, in terms of the context of what we're talking about tonight, is really what our last two panelists were talking about, which is slipping it in. Trojan horsing it in, which is the way I've been talking about it lately. But really, your first job as a storyteller is tell a good story, right? Because if you don't tell a good story, nobody watches and nobody pays attention. And civic entertainment, I suppose, right? But we are first and foremost entertainment. We have to entertain. And to me, what was great about Spotlight was not anything we brought to it, but like that story of those journalists was just a great story. It was a story of deference. And I always thought about it as a story about, the cop hunting for the murderer and finding out that he's one of the people responsible for the murder, right? And similarly, with the Post, at the heart of it, it's about a woman realizing that she's the smartest man in the room, right? And so to me, it's telling a great story that then can also get these other things in. And as writers, I think that's, what we're supposed to try to do.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a quote, which I would have normally read at the top, but I think this is a really good introduction for Amy. Here's another one. And again, this is Hannah Arendt, who, of course, is chock full of great information. She was, again, the German philosopher and historian, and she wrote, "This constant lying is not aimed at making people believe a lie, but in ensuring that no one believes anything anymore. A people that can no longer distinguish between truth and lies cannot distinguish between right and wrong. And such a people, deprived of the power to think and judge, is without knowing and willing it, completely subject to the rule of lies. With such a people, you can do anything you want." So Amy has vast experience working professionally with professional legacy outlets. And over the course of that career and since, those legacy outlets have pretty much changed a lot. We have citizen journalists now, we have podcasts, we have people that don't know what journalism is. They just have a microphone and a pretty face or not. And then we also have clickbait, because the more you look at something, the more advertising sells, the more advertising, the more, and we have a lot of firewalls now. So if you want to read something, you have to pay, even if it's just for one article. And so there's a headline is so important now, because that might be all the news people are getting. The rest they're getting on social media, which is also owned by people who have their own agenda. So Amy, talk to us a little bit how you managed to synthesize in The Girls on the Bus. What was great about that is that you had different backgrounds for these journalists all on the campaign trail. They all weren't Amy. We showed that clip of someone that didn't know what off the record meant, And so tell us a little bit about trying to synthesize that changing landscape of media into your show.
Yeah, well, it's an honor to share the screen with Josh. I think you chose the right profession, but obviously your movies are gold standard at the New York Times newsroom. Yeah, I was a journalist for 20 years, covered. I was on the campaign trail with Hillary, Obama, and then Trump, covering Hillary in 2016. Being the beat reporter covering Hillary in 2016 meant you got a lot of calls from unknown number, and it was Donald Trump calling. So he also tweeted and called me fake news. So this was the dichotomy, right? He would tweet that I was fake news, and I'd get like trolled endlessly and get death threats, and then he'd also be calling you on the phone. So, but to the point of The Girls on the Bus, what was really fun in crafting these characters and drawing from my experience as a journalist, and also all of the kind of books that I've read about the old days. I think I recommended What It Takes about the 8/8 campaign and all of these great old campaign books, is we made these characters sort of avatars for the debate, the real debates that I was hearing kind of rollicking newsrooms, right? I mean, you had Lola, the one that says, I don't know what off the record is, kind of representing the TikTok journalist, the influencer. The majority of 18 to 34-year-olds get their news from a Chinese propaganda app on TikTok, right? So you had to have that representation. And then you had legacy media, Sadie and Grace, and then you had Kimberlyn as sort of the Fox News character. And so what I was hearing within the Times and, is this debate among young people who were driven into journalism not to be objective like in the Post, but to be activists. I think there was a real debate that objectivity existed when white men covered other great white men and they had no skin in the game, and that the stakes are too high now, and kind of how can you be objective in covering this particular White House? And then they would really clash. I mean, there's an old school of New York Times political reporter that I grew up in that says you shouldn't even vote. If you're a political reporter, you shouldn't vote because that could be seen, you can see your party registration, and that could be seen as bias. And I was like a young campaign reporter in 2008, and I was like, I can't vote. It was very shocking to me, but that was the level with which people tried to embrace objectivity. And now I think it's sort of thrown out the window to this sort of Sadie, the main character in the show, kind of says, well, objectivity is a complete contradiction. Objective journalism is a contradiction in terms. We all come to a story with preconceived notions. If someone's trying to take away your rights, or someone, there's no way that you could possibly approach a story without your own biases. So why not be honest about those biases? And so this debate between authenticity and objectivity, and then you have this younger generation that would say journalism is activism, and that would be like anathema to like half the newsroom that's slightly older than me. And so we got to play with all of these debates, and I think a couple other panelists have talked about the difficulty of doing that in the Trump era. Like we were living in a total fantasy world, right? But at the same time, there were certain issues. There was misinformation. There were, legacy media that got things wrong and had to admit that they were wrong, which is not something like we're great at, but that I do think kind of helps trust. But certainly the erosion of trust has, and I think you worked at the LA Times, the erosion of trust has corresponded with all of these awful economic headwinds that have just decimated newsrooms, right? So I think Los Angeles would be a completely different city if we had the robust press corps like New York does, And so I think so much of what's happening in this country does have to do with that decimation of media. But I also don't want to be so dismissive of the, as you call them, citizen journalists. I think Josh mentioned something that I was actually took the words out of my mouth. When I started working as a news assistant at the foreign desk of the Wall Street Journal, some of the greatest journalists, breaking huge stories, winning Pulitzers, didn't go to college. It was not necessarily a job. And if you look at these guys, the tabloid guys of the past, the great columnists of the past, they were working class guys. And I think when I covered Trump in 2016, I remember him coming down the gold elevator, and I was like, people think that he's a billionaire. And the Times was like, no, we've covered that he's bankrupt. It's fine. And, for a very long time, we did not take him serious. Not just we, the Times, but the whole establishment of media didn't really take him seriously. And I think part of that is that we've become elitist. So you work at the Harvard Crimson and then you get a job at the New York Times. And I think that there was a disconnect with the rest of the country. And I think in some of these barriers to entry being gone, you could have a Substack, you can have a podcast. Yes, it's dangerous. What is vetted? What is edited? What is fact checked? Of course it's dangerous, but it also allows all of these perspectives that don't necessarily get the job and the legacy, especially as there's so few jobs now. So I think there is something about the democratization that could be, a positive, but it also is very scary, as you said, because you're not sure what's vetted or true.
And in that sense, while there are all those positives and more people having a voice and more people having avenues to get that voice out, there's also a great danger. For instance, Russia has made a lot of, and this is where the word fake comes in, outlets all through America online that look like they're legitimate news stations or people, and they're just avatars for their own psyops. And that brings me back to Josh, because he did The Fifth Estate, which was about WikiLeaks. And so there are dangers when somebody might not have the best interest of America at heart or our democracy at heart. And that must have been a lot to research as well. And that's a very different thing to research than the Post and Spotlight was. Can you talk a little bit about making that movie?
Yeah, sort of it gets into a little bit of what Amy was saying about this debate about, objective versus, versus reporting with a position behind it. And, you know, I had this great conversation with Nick Lemon, who is the dean of the J School at Columbia at the time, as I was researching that. And he was like, you know, we all think of the New York Times as this sort of objective institution that is, you know, he's like, but really it's just the Sulzberger family, right? It's a family business, right? And like, and so in that way, yes, there's these ethics that have been passed down, these sort of standards of journalism that are held to there. But you know, it's really not like hard and fast laws or rules, right? So like, you know, Julian Assange was a publisher, right? He just had a different set of ethics, right? I didn't agree with them, but you know, it really, you know, Fox News, they have a different set of ethics, right? I don't agree with them. And I think what's hard is, right, the danger is, you know, the Times has shifted to the left. So if the Times keeps shifting to the left and Fox News keeps shifting to the right and really just competing for eyeballs, then like, you know, what are we doing, guys? And I think it's hard. But again, I'm not a journalist, right? I'm just somebody who likes to try to tell a good story. I thought Julian Assange was a good story because it was exactly what you said. You know, it was someone who started off with good intentions, right? And who then got corrupted by power, as people tend to, and then wound up doing some bad things. You know, I loved what WikiLeaks did at the start. I loved the ideas behind it. I didn't like where it moved. And that I thought was a really interesting story, you know, within the world of journalism. You know, it turns out that, you know, that movie was, you know, maybe it's funny because if I would rewrite that movie today, I would have done it with just two characters, Julian and Nick Davies, to talk about old media versus new media and to talk about those two approaches, because that was also, in some ways, I think it was a more interesting story than the one we wound up telling. And I think in some ways the reason the movie didn't succeed the way maybe Spotlight or The Post did was because, you know, there was a lot of issue there, right? There was a lot of like thoughtful issue, but the story itself was sort of a Bildungsroman, which people had seen before, right? As opposed to, you know, a story that was a little more edgy, that was a little more gripping. And that gets back to, again, my earlier point, which is I think you need to tell a good story, right? You know, you can have all the best intentions in the world, but if you don't tell a good story, you're not going to capture the attention you want, right? To get in, slip in this, you know, this chocolate covered broccoli.
Yeah. Well, you know, the best sign that I saw through the entire Writers Guild strike, which I think everybody saw this, was pay us or we'll spoil Succession. Whoever wrote that, and then multiple people copied it afterwards because a good line just spreads. But Succession was pretty much about the media moguls, not in our best interest. That ended with a fascist president. And since then, Jesse went and did Mountainhead, which of course is another thing we were on strike about, which is AI. And now that Peter Thiel owns all our information and AI is upon us, it's pretty dangerous. And so I would leave you with this quote: "There will come a time when the rich own all the media, and it will be impossible for the public to make an informed opinion." That was said by Albert Einstein in 1949, and I wish he was wrong. Okay, so we're going to have Josh and Amy return in a little bit, and now we're going to move on to our next panel, which is women and the rule of law. And I had a jabot and I meant to get it out just to put it on so I could read this quote. I forgot it. It's there. But anyway, the decision whether or not to bear a child is central to a woman's life, to her well-being and dignity. When the government controls that decision for her, she is being treated as less than a full adult human responsible for her own choices. That, of course, was said by Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And this is a headline from ABC 13 from January 25th, 2024. Texas had over 26,000 rape-related pregnancies in the 16 months after the abortion ban, study shows. That was that headline. So anyway, now we have two wonderful panelists joining us for this segment. We have Daniel Stiepleman, who indeed wrote On the Basis of Sex, which is the wonderful telling of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's early court and early struggles to become the great attorney she became before she became Supreme Court Justice. And we have Yahlin Chang, who is the showrunner for The Handmaid's Tale. And so we get to talk both about what rule of law looks like when it's working for women and how it's weaponized against us when it's not. And so let's begin with Daniel, because we need something more upbeat, and your aunt certainly was someone we could all look up to. So you didn't have, what is it like to, first of all, we've asked everyone to give us a book, and we're going to send that to everybody later. And Daniel, tell which book you recommended and why.
Oh, there's a book that Ruth said, well, if you're going to write this movie about me, you have to read it. And it's called No Constitutional Right to Be Ladies. And I always enjoyed when we were going around talking about the movie in LA, people would go, oh, all right. And then in New York, people would go, oh, that's interesting. Oh, yeah. And then in Washington, D.C., they'd all write it down. So that's the different cultures. That
is interesting. So having read her decisions and her dissents, I love that her dissents, which she became so famous for, this is the button I got. It's my magnet that I got at the notorious RBG Skirball Cultural Center exhibit that was so wonderful about her life and had all this interactive stuff with her decisions and Life with Marty and everything else. The thing about her dissents is that they weren't there just to say, hey, I disagree. They were there to set the tone, to plant the seed, to get the right decision down the line. And in one specifically, she calls on Congress to act, and eventually Congress did. And they did make equal pay for allow women to sue who hadn't gotten the same raises over all the multiple years. And they did act. So talk about bringing to life is the important thing, where you follow the law and fight for it, but also what you can do when you don't have everyone else on your same page.
Well, I think, the power of Ruth was that she really believed in the power of persuasion, and both was willing to be persuaded and believed that she had the power to persuade. And I think that's both sides of that are kind of what we lost in the last few years. Yeah. And I think the other thing that Ruth recognized was that you need a Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but you also need a Gloria Steinem, right? You need the people who are going to shift the culture, and you need the person who's going to sit down with the books and put their head down and do the work of changing the law. And you don't get either. Well, you're not supposed to, under our system, get either. There's a quote in the movie from a Harvard law professor named Paul Freund that Ruth quoted a lot, where he said, the law should not reflect the weather of the day, but will reflect the climate of the era. And I think where this day is getting kind of scary is that the law is getting ahead of the climate of the era, or is not reflecting the climate of the era, as a lot of us are experiencing it. Or even more terrifying, maybe some of the decisions the Supreme Court are making really do reflect the climate of the era, and I'm way off, in which case I'm just not living in the country I thought I was. But I think that those were sort of Ruth's two great insights, was that the system only works if we're all willing to actually listen to each other and be open to persuasion, and that if the culture and the law are working hand in hand and neither's getting, or if the law especially is not getting too far ahead of the culture.
Well, what's difficult is when, I read from Anne Frank's diary, and that was banned last week to students in Florida, statewide. It was on the 8th grade curriculum. So it's to get people to be persuaded, or to get them to open their eyes when they're in echo chambers. Everyone's in their own echo chamber. Someone mentioned Fox News. And again, like Einstein said, it depends who owns it. You're not just buying news, you're buying the viewpoint of the person that owns that particular outlet. And so, Yahlin, you have Margaret Atwood's great book for the source material there. We all like to see the hope and the managing to overturn that horrible, horrible situation that they're in and the way the country's being run, or the part of it where it's Gilead. First of all, how are you? That must have been so hard to go through and be in that world for so long. Are you okay?
You know, it's funny because I actually found it incredibly cathartic to work on that show, because I was able to channel like everything that was going on in the world and all my anxiety about the deterioration of our democracy into the screen. And that was like a huge gift for me and very cleansing, so that I could put all of that there in my work. And then I'd come home sort of free and, you know, be able to be a mom to my 3 kids, you know? So that, so it was a great privilege. And, you know, it's funny because I started on that show in 2017 and then spent 9 years like in Gilead. And it's this weird thing where, you know, all of us in Hollywood, it's very important that our narratives seem real and not made up. And when you start in the world of Gilead and The Handmaid's Tale, it seems so weird because you have these red robes and you have wives in teal, and you know, you have this like weird caste system. It's seen in this bizarre ceremony ritual and ritualized rape, and it just seems so odd and so weird trying to ground it. And then what happened was that as the show went on over the years, the world kept creeping closer and closer to the show, you know? So like when I started even working on that show, I never thought that Roe v. Wade would get overturned, even like as a writer for that, you know? And when it happened, it was by then like not even shocking. Like I think what's really scary, one thing that Margaret wrote, is like how what seems out of the ordinary becomes normal. Like everything just becomes normalized, and you just still, it's like, oh yeah, it sucks that, you know, we don't have control over our bodies anymore. It sucks that as a woman, I have fewer rights now than when I started on that show, you know, but like still got to get my kid to volleyball practice, still have to figure out like what's for dinner or whatever, you know. And I mean, the thing about The Handmaid's Tale is that it shows a world where it's too late. Like all the bad shit has happened and the authoritarians have taken over. And like you had mentioned, like, you know, people getting kidnapped off the streets, like that's a scene in The Handmaid's Tale in the pilot, you know? I mean, even now, like you have, it's astounding. Like you have Elon Musk and JD Vance talking about how important it is for women to have babies. You have this whole like trad wife TikTok phenomenon about how women should just stay home and have babies. And you sort of can't believe it. You have this like weird, whatever, beauty ethic on the right, where it's like, it's all about wearing whatever, 30 pounds of makeup and having 50 pounds of hair, like in the boobs. It's like, it's just, it is unbelievable to actually live in this world, you know. And I also think that, you know, women are, women and minorities, you see in a world that is cruel, that it is easy to, it becomes easier and easier to oppress minorities and people who are vulnerable. You know, childbearing does make women extremely vulnerable. People are always asked, you know, like, oh, what did it feel like working on this cautionary tale? And I feel like if we did this cautionary tale, then we really failed, because not enough people were cautioned, you know? And yet I'm happy that, you know, we can even have Zooms like this and that we're still able to voice our opinions and, you know, to show our opposition, although the sort of cowardice of like billionaires and people in charge, like that is astonishing. Like the capitulation of people who really have nothing to lose, like to this, you know, that's just unbelievable. But yeah, it is, it's all, just extremely, disturbing.
Do you think you could have started that show now?
It is very possible that people would be scared now to put a show like that on. And, you know, I think it's hard in Hollywood because you need a lot of money and a lot of resources to fund a show like that. And I don't see a lot of bravery right now.
Daniel, you also did a film called Out of My Mind, which was a Peabody. Oh, I said I was going to say awards, but there it is. He won a Peabody for it. This one about, the fight that a young student has with a disability to try to be able to learn in class and get their education, and the discrimination faced, and the fight to change that so that they can actually be in school and not have to be homeschooled. I'm reminded of this one because if we're all clocking all the executive orders that are being passed out every day, there's now criminalization against the homeless. Project 2025 classifies trans people as mentally ill. JD just called homeless people all mentally ill. They are opening up institutions which were for the disabled. Everything is in steps. Everything is to normalize something. Get used to this other community that you're not in being targeted, and then we can expand it to this community or that community. And everybody who they think isn't functional the way they are, disabled or doesn't look like them or anything else, is, on the chopping block as far as they're concerned. So that was also a wonderful movie. And as education itself is under assault, as the Department of Education has gotten rid of, you did so much work on that. Talk to us a little bit about how a film like that contributes to our understanding of what people are going through and how they're just like us and need the same benefits and education that we do. The value in making movies like that.
Yeah, I fought to write that movie because before I was a writer, I was a teacher. And so I had never been a 13-year-old girl with cerebral palsy, but I had been her teacher, Mr. Dimming, and I had done that job well sometimes, and I had done that job badly sometimes. And so the opportunity to go back into that world and sort of dramatize the challenge of that, and from her point of view, was one I just couldn't pass up. And so that was, that was a great joy. And I think what was important about that film is that, well, I'm going to totally blow the ending for everybody. Enjoy that. Nobody learns a heartwarming lesson, despite it being a Disney movie. At the end of the day, it's a movie about a girl who thinks that, she can get this, she's nonverbal, and she thinks that she can get this sort of Stephen Hawking style device, an AAC, that will help her communicate, that people will know her and they'll recognize her and she'll be able to participate in school. And it's a beautiful moment when she gets it, but of course that's not how sixth grade works. And so at the end of the movie, the sort of her powerful realization is, oh, I see, you're never going to treat me with respect. And that's going to have to be your problem, not mine, because I'm entitled to an education and I'm staying right here despite it. The other thing that I was really proud of in that movie is that her parents are kind of antagonists. They love her, at least in the structure. They love her. They're trying to help her. They're trying to protect her from ever, feeling pain or having to stand up and fight for herself. And in that way, they're getting in her way. And so part of it is she has to overcome both the people who are trying to get in her way and the people who are trying to help her, but in the ways that she doesn't need help, because what she really wants is to be able to speak up for herself.
Well, in tribute to that film in particular, I pulled this Justice Ginsburg quote, which is, "If your voice held no power, they wouldn't be trying to silence you." And that fits for both. So we will see both Daniel and Yahlin again very shortly. And now we're moving on to the panel that is known as Resistance Against Repression. I really struggled. I wanted to call this Rebellion Against Fascism because that's where we're moving on to right now. And my quote for that one is, one that's all the way back from 1918. I was going to say 1918, but no, that can't be right. It's from 2018, and here it is. When we look at Auschwitz, we see the end of the process. It's important to remember that the Holocaust did not actually start with gas chambers. This hatred gradually developed from words, stereotypes, and prejudice through legal exclusion and dehumanization and executing violence. That statement was released November 26, 2018 by Auschwitz Memorial during Trump's first term. And it certainly applies again now. And so we're going to welcome to this panel. Are they here? Do we have Winnie Holzman? Turn on your camera, and there he is, Dan Gilroy, yay. And so Winnie, of course, everyone knows from Wicked and the upcoming sequel, Wicked for Good. And Dan wrote both on season 1 and season 2 of Andor. And we're going to specifically talk about 2 of those episodes in a minute. But I'm going to start with Winnie. We saw that clip about, you know, the way to get control of people is to just give them a real good enemy, to make an enemy out of. You make a scapegoat. You make it just what Auschwitz Memorial was talking about. And these are 2 completely different genres. We're sort of going into how do people who just want to write different genres deal with what we're dealing with right now. And while you wrote those before this presidency, way before. Based
on a novel by Gregory Maguire, which he wrote in the early to mid 90s. It was published in the mid 90s, and we began writing in the late 90s, and we opened on Broadway in 2003. And, you know, of course, as much as the movie is expanded and deepened and made cinematic, and we worked our butts off to make it into 2 movies rather than a staged musical, the story and our way of talking about fascism has remained exactly the same. And I've had many people come to me since Trump's newest era, since the recent era, come to me and say, I just saw it again and you rewrote, didn't you? That's what they think. We haven't rewritten. They're just seeing it with new eyes.
Yeah, well, because history repeats, isn't it? We've all lived through the beginnings of this or more of this. That's why I quoted Auschwitz Memorial specifically, because they're talking about how it starts. And so there will always be, and we will always recognize these things in entertainment and stories, because we have the lived experience or the memory of the lived experience. So in Wicked, you have something else which I think is very interesting to talk about now, which is the people that see what Oz is intending here, and yet because they don't want to not have their own power or they're ambitious in their own right, as much as they see friends are being hurt and are hurt for them, they'll still go along with it and keep silent. It's a tough line to write, but at that cliffhanger, that's where we've left Glinda.
Yeah, and a lot more happens, obviously.
Yeah, I know.
But there's no doubt that our story is a lot about how we view each other. Do we view in a surface way, or do we view through the eyes of compassion? And I think that's what, actually I've been sort of focused on it throughout this terrible time. Trying to remember that part of our job, I think, as writers, and let me just slip in here that I've been really, really riveted by what everyone had to say, and I'm a huge Dan Gilroy fan as well, so I'm very excited to be part of it. But I just feel like, for me, I get overwhelmed if I'm thinking too much about issues or big ideas like that, I'm thinking more usually about how do I open someone's heart, and and what's going to lead to people to have an experience, a group experience, the audience, that helps them feel more, because I feel like we're all so numbed out. And I mean, fits right in with what everyone's been saying. But there's so much numbing that our culture is doing right now, and has been doing for a long time. So I just feel like that's a big part of my job, and the part I'm most able to focus on.
Yeah. So get to their heart. That's exactly the good advice. Dan, you wrote episodes 7 and 9 of this season. 7 is very interesting because we actually saw it here in LA. It's when the Empire provokes a rebellion on Gorman with the specific intent of sending in the military to crack down. We're seeing that now. We know that it's going to get worse. We see it in Washington. We saw it in LA, and now it's announced 19 red states are sending their, people over to the National Guard over to blue states to just invade and to be armed. And they're getting weapons. People who've never had weapons before. The National Guard isn't armed. So they are now. And, what could go wrong? And so we know that this is pretty much a tactic to set up to declare military law eventually. And that, if you think you're going to have elections and that they won't look like the ones in Russia, then you missed a meeting. So I want to talk about that episode first, because this was, again, like everyone else, is written a long time ago, but it is based on what is generally a history that's practiced in every fascist historic nation we've seen.
Well, yeah, I think it's great that you started off with a quote from the era of the Holocaust, because World War II began with a staged incident on the Polish border, a false flag incident in which Germans killed their own troops. They got a bunch of drunken sort of people who'd gone AWOL, and they killed them on the border. And that's how World War II started, as a pretext to invade Poland. So yes, history does repeat itself. And I think it's fascinating to listen to all the wonderful people who've spoken tonight. And you do get the sense of, we're all sort of history buffs. We're all very aware of history. And we're aware that the times we're living through, as terrible as they are now, are not unique, unfortunately. And it very much seems, when you hear all of us speak, that the powers that be, the legal powers that be, are almost following our playbook. They're taking things that we're writing about and using them. And it seems that way because that's the way it is. Because we are putting in narrative form events that just repeat themselves over and over again. And we just happen to be unlucky enough to live in a time in which a fascistic, self-declared emperor has taken over our world and is trying to consume it, every piece of it. So history is repeating itself. And certainly, what was going on with the ICE coming to LA, that was only several weeks after our episode aired. The crux of that episode is a staged incident. It's pretty much the fulcrum of almost the entire second season, and it culminates with this autocratic empire run by this self-proclaimed emperor again, who's decided that there's a planet that's got a mineral that they very much want. They know they can't go in and just take it. They could, but they've decided they don't want to. So they stage an incident in which people who protest on the planet against the taking of this mineral are not only killed and slaughtered, but the news services that service the empire come in and portray the empire's troops who've been killed as martyrs. So they've completely spun it, which is exactly what's happening now. So you watch ICE coming into LA, and if you just come in and you go, oh my God, these cars are burning and police are getting killed. Well, nobody likes to see that. Nobody likes to see cars burning, but there's no context. There's no context. There's just, this event is happening. We're not going to tell you what the real story is. We're just going to report on the result. And news is not doing its job.
Right.
News is not doing its job. And you can go all the way back to the movie Network. What was Network about? Network is about the era in which newsrooms suddenly had to make a profit. Mm-hmm. The second newsrooms have to make a profit, it becomes entertainment. That's what it is. So the news we watch now is entertainment. There's no context. And when there's no context and there's no sense of texture, you get a headline of imperial martyrs, ice people getting punched, cars being burned. Why? Why? Because there's reason for all these things to happen.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. No, please.
I was just going to say one of those that was tweeted endlessly was about the car being burned. That wasn't actually from that LA incident. That was something someone took from the Lakers having won one of their championships and played it a million times. So you don't even know what you're getting is accurate because somebody wants you to think that way. But I want to shift to your episode 9, which is so renowned already. Everybody talks about Mon Mothma's speech to the Senate. And one of the things about that speech is why people talk about that so much is we just want that to happen now. We want someone to stand up and say, instead of, gee, we need to work bipartisanly, instead of, to the half the people that are just paid to be there and on different people's agenda, we need to say, this is a lie. You are telling lies. It just spoke so much to the moment and said and called out the emperor the way it is. Was that, even though it was written in advance, you still had the first term to go off of. Was that in any way cathartic for you? Or
oh yeah, I wrote that in 23. So Trump is gone, but the fungus that's been left behind, that's been growing exponentially in our political institutions, was thriving. I mean, already, so people were turning their back on everything they claimed to have believed in 23. So now I have to write a speech. This is major Star Wars canon. This speech exists. You never really heard it, but you always knew that she gave this very, very heroic speech. So I'm sitting there writing it, and I'm pissed off. I'm furious. So having the opportunity to have her speak, she's really speaking. She's witness to the course of the show. See, in Star Wars, the Galactic Senate had a long history as a governing body driven by democratic principles. So through the run of Andor, we and she have watched the Senate's descent into total capitulation to the Senate's rule, to the Emperor's rule. So she's now giving a speech, one to her Senate colleagues, but it's also being broadcast. On our show, they try to stop it, but it's actually they're for it being broadcast or start. So she's giving two audiences here. And she's risking her life to do this. As a matter of fact, she does not believe she's going to come out of this alive. She believes she will be killed for what she's about to say. But the first group that she's talking to, which I was really most acutely aware of while I was writing the speech, are these craven elected officials who completely abandoned their post and left their constituents at the mercy of complete evil. That was going on when I wrote it. That's going on now, and that's going on in the show. The second group you're speaking to are the galaxy's infinitely diverse inhabitants, because what Mon understands is this is her last chance to speak. And what she understands is the goal of unbridled authority, and people have brought it up already tonight, is to make people feel helpless. They're trying to break you down to believe that resistance is something that's completely futile without any chance of success. So she's trying to break through that. And she's saying the death of truth is where it starts. This is the ultimate evil. They're trying to shut her up, but they can't. And through self-immolation, which is pretty much what she does, she stands as an example for others to follow. Very much like one of my personal heroes, Navalny. Navalny goes back. He knows he's probably not going to come out alive. That act of self-immolation, that act of heroism, will always stand as a flare for people who are fighting authority. Mon's speech does the same thing. I firmly believe that our show is only slightly ahead of the curve of where we are right now. Right now, people can still get up and speak and not be killed. And it was brought up earlier that there's certainly a chance that a Hollywood 100 will somehow appear before the Senate and lose their livelihoods. I firmly believe that. I think it's going to go much farther than that. I think when you're putting troops on the street with guns, you are absolutely and utterly laying the groundwork for the death, the physical, militant, violent death of people who resist authority. So I firmly believe it's heading that way. And I believe, in fact, the name of that episode was Who Are You? And the reason it's named Who Are You is because there's the climactic moment. Our star asks somebody who's about to kill him, who are you? He's literally asking, I don't know who you are. Who are you? But the real meaning of that is when you are faced with an encroaching fascistic authority, who are you? What will you do? Are you going to fight this? Or are you going to become complicit through silence or actually join in what's going on? And you better know which side you're on, because every one of those has a price tag.
And you know that show during her speech, one of the things that you just feel is when not just the leader lackeys, but also the networks that are showing it, you hear them saying, shut her down, turn this off. So it isn't just a matter of getting disinformation out there, and disinformation is different than misinformation. It's a matter of not letting the truth come out as well. Those voices are silenced. And so, Winnie, in your movie, you know, that same thing happens at the end. Where
Yeah,
sort
that's
of like the Wicked Witch. It's right there, vilifying someone, calling a name. How many times has Trump given like a nickname to someone? Right.
Yes, and
away,
it's all happening because she's saying, she reveals that he is a fraud.
Has no
She
power.
reveals that he is a fraud, and that she actually has power, more power than him, in terms of spiritual power, magical power, and he has to destroy her reputation and turn her into a hunted, felon animal. And sadly, obviously, we're seeing it played out. I guess I just feel like that what Dan just said is really, I think, the crux of everything. It's like, this is the moment that has laid itself at our feet. I mean, when I was in 8th grade reading Anne Frank, I was a pretty interesting little person, but I never dreamed that you could read aloud from the Diary of Anne Frank and say, oh, it's happening right now in my city. And that's what's happening. And so this is the moment laid here, and we must step into it. And who are we going to be as we step into that moment? And, that's the question. Who are we going to be as writers? To me, I think we all know who we are as people, as who we are as writers. It's all the same thing. We live our writing. We're not, it's not like we go, here I am writing something and then I'm a whole other person in my life. I mean, our writing is our life. It's all one. So I don't know if that made any sense to anybody, but.
No, it totally makes sense. These things we're talking about are holy. This is a religion we're talking about. You believe these things. You either have a soul and understand these things or you don't. If you have a soul and understand these things, you reach a point like my character did in the show, in which you realize that your human frailty and desires to live is superseded by something larger. That there are things worth dying for. And you either believe that or you don't. And I believe there are things worth dying for. And I will die for them. And I fully expect there's a chance if I live long enough, I will probably be faced with that, as many people will be faced with that, because we now have the ability to talk about it. When they shut this down, it's going to hit the streets. It will no longer become a protest through conversation. It will become the crossroads that all protest movements reach, which is, are you either going to go through nonviolence or you're going to go through violence? Those will become the choices. I'm a big believer in nonviolence. I think the greatest act of insurrection that's ever happened is what Gandhi did with India. Very difficult to repeat, very difficult to stamp down human emotions. I think our country is much more geared toward violence. And I would not be surprised at all if once things start to become really clamped down, that violence becomes the option. And then you will really have some choices to make. And
our country is armed.
Yeah. Well, I believe these are holy things we're talking about.
Absolutely.
This is my religion.
I want to welcome back the rest of our panelists now, and use this last segment to get a final thought from everyone. I wanted to ask Alex and Peter, because didn't you write for David Letterman also?
Yep.
Yeah. So, it's something we didn't have time to cover today, but opening monologues on variety shows, that's a lot. Believe it or not, that's how a lot of people get the news. It's a way to comment on something, but it also serves as a balm for people at the end of the night when they're so frustrated and have heard horrible things. A joke is made about it, but it's a true joke. And in a lot of times, you can't help but think of Stephen Colbert being part of that pact to, having a bias monitor they'll now have on that network. All kinds of things are happening. So talk a little bit about your experience really quickly for everyone, because we're in our closing minutes. But if you can touch on that or any other thought you have.
Well, I would say it unfortunately, late night entertainment is in hospice care. So it's dying. No one is watching it, which is why part of the reason why Stephen Colbert is going away. But what I would like to do is plug Dan Gilroy's show. And if everyone watching really needs to see Andor, because Luthen is the model for what the left needs to do. It's in order to combat the Empire, we have to be every bit as ruthless and pragmatic as they are. This sort of like, are we stepping on toes? Are we saying the wrong thing? Are like the left has this, circular firing squad mentality that has to end. We have to change our tactics, and Luthen is kind of the model. In yes, Moff, but also it has to get a little bit more savage than we have historically been willing to do. So I would say everyone should
do that. And people should always remember he dies in this show.
Oh yeah,
almost everybody in our character dies. There's a high price to be paid for the things we are talking about. Very high price. And the only thing that really comes out of it is the people who pay that price will forever be looked at as heroes and martyrs and serve as an inspiration for the people in front of them. Navalny will always be alive.
Right.
Always.
So watch Andor.
And if we're talking late night, I actually still watch. I watch Seth Meyers. I watch The Daily Show. I watch John Oliver. They keep me sane. So whatever jokes we were writing for Dave in the 90s, those writers right now are absolutely crushing it. And their take on the news is to me as important as reading any great newspaper. I think they do brilliant work. So I think the late night shows keep me sane.
Yeah, and a number of the panelists today used the word cathartic, and I think that's what their comedy delivers to some people at the end of the night. We're still worried about the things they talk about, but we know someone else.
And Saturday Night Live. I think Saturday Night Live is still relevant. They just had their 50th anniversary, and I watch it every week, and I love it.
David, I just want to quickly, if you can tell the E Pluribus Unum story, only because people need to see how even then, when someone is out of office, there's still, when things are properly done, they are consulting the right people. You did a episode that brought all the pre-existing secretaries of state together. Hillary, Colin, Madeleine Albright were there, and with your character, tell what happened.
Yeah, we did something. Our research showed that in times of great stress, that secretaries of state will reach out to former secretaries of state, and so Hillary Clinton, Colin Powell, and Madeleine Albright all came and did the show, and they gave advice to our Secretary of State Ted Leone on how to handle a nuclear crisis with Pakistan and India that ended up. There was an attack on the White House, like I mentioned in the earlier segment, and we thought that it had to do with Hindu nationalists or Muslim extremists, but it turned out that it was actually white nationalists in the United States that attacked attacked the White House, and so they all weighed in, and E Pluribus Unum means of many, out of many, one, which is the point of the American project.
Right, but at one point, Madeleine Albright got a phone call.
Oh, so
That's what I want you to
yes,
say.
there was another, a demonstration of this was in another episode I did called the Doability Doctrine, which was Madeleine Albright's doctrine, which is when the U.S. gets involved, generally post-World War II. It's good. There are a lot of examples of it not being good, but in any case, we had to shut down for an hour while Secretary Madeleine Albright had to get on the phone with all the previous secretaries of state, and we heard her asking questions of John Kerry, who was the Secretary of State at the time. It had to do with the Iran deal that was about to be made, the Iran nuclear deal, which was such a great deal. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore. But we heard her saying, John, I have a question. And it just showed how it's such, our show is like a quaint little period piece looking back on it now, because that's how things were done, and that's what we were modeling. Good God.
And you didn't say to her, Mads, come on, we're losing light. Nuclear deal, this is more important. No.
Yeah, we were all amazed that was happening
that turned out to be that. All right, any closing thoughts anyone has for these last 5 minutes, please.
Well, I've got one.
Go ahead.
And it's for the writers out there, and even the lurkers, whoever's tuned in, and that's, facts are under assault. And I think, once we've accepted the idea that multiple versions of a fact is acceptable, we've lost the ability to communicate. I think that as writers, we have to be cognizant that and this is only within the last, I'd say, 15 years maybe the last 25 years since the second Bush, is that there's been an acceptance of different versions of a fact. And that's deadly. That's deadly for any ability to communicate and to get anything done. So I think as writers, we've just got to be cognizant that, that we need to just hammer and hammer and hammer and nail the idea that this is a fact. This is the fact. There's no alternatives. And we move forward with this single point of view.
Yes.
Yeah. I would also say that everybody on this panel, and it's an honor for me to be a part of it, is an example for the writers out there of what you can do when you take your talent and you just don't try to collect a paycheck. Obviously our job is first and foremost is to entertain and never bore and never preach. But at the same time, as somebody said, putting spinach into your cake or whatever it was, there are ways to get messages across. It was certainly done during the Hollywood 10. It's been done ever since. And our job is just as hard as it is to lay exposition and lay pipe when you're setting up a scene. You got to try to make the effort to use what's going on and use our medium to get some messages out there, I think.
I just want to add something that I keep saying to anyone who will listen, which is that, if it's true that the movies and television shows we've been talking about here tonight can have a positive impact on the world, then it stands to reason that it's equally true that every, nihilistic, violent movie about a simplistic good guy who kills a simplistic bad guy because they're slightly better at shooting is also having an impact on the world. So I don't know what a non-political movie is. Whatever we decide to make movies about, that is the impact we're leaving on the world behind us.
That's a good point.
Brigitte, you're good? Yahlin, anything?
It's interesting because in the end, so we did try to tell an inspiring story, but the thing about writing the authoritarian regime there was that it was shockingly easy because you just sort of imagine people incredibly vain and venal with no conscience whatsoever and who don't give a shit about anyone, and you imagine what they would do if given unchecked power. And so, I think that in that way, it was very easy to predict what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amy or Josh, anybody else have anything to add? Winnie? All right. So, first of all, I want to thank some people for tonight, which has been extraordinary. I'm so grateful to the panelists today who have all been brave and brilliant and took up their time to come on and just share their brilliance with us. And I hope it inspires everyone who's watching. I owe so much thanks to Greg Mitchell. He is our communications guru. He worked tirelessly with me on this. This was a lot to put on over weekends, at nights, constantly. Greg, everybody at the Guild loves you for a reason, for so many years, and I love you too. A shout out to Dana Weissman, who from the East gave encouragement and support, and to all the panelists, which again, I hope you'll all read the program and learn more about them. They're all wonderful. I'm going to leave you with one final closing quote. This is from a rabbi who in the 1980s was president of the Long Island and Suffolk Board of Rabbis. There was a virulent strain of anti-Semitism that had hit New York. And he, on his own, got different spiritual leaders, media, news organizations, politicians, everyone together. It was a long draw, but he managed to get started the first task force against anti-Semitism in that county. He kept working with government until finally, with the help of the current governor and with 2 senators, he got the first hate crimes laws passed in the New York State Senate. Those hate crimes laws became a template for hate crimes laws across the nation, some of which you see are being ignored right now. I'm going to read you a quote from his Human Rights Commission testimony. And this was, of course, him fighting anti-Semitism and other racist attacks. Here we go. Crimes involving religion are constitutionally crimes against our Bill of Rights and democracy. They must be treated by civil authorities as crimes against society and therefore prosecuted and punished by society at large. As hate and prejudice travels across oceans and continents, all people of decency, and certainly those in positions of power, have a duty in sounding a civilized alarm. For criminal prejudice sickens every society which allows it to thrive. That man was Rabbi Gabriel Maza, and I hope tonight we sounded a civilized alarm that people will hear. And I hope the panel we put on tonight would have made him proud. And so, sit down and go write, then stand up, rise up, and speak out, and march, and call your senators, write letters, do whatever you have to do. It is no time for silence. We are the Writers Guild. We have the words. We can use them. So on behalf of the Writers Education Committee of the Writers Guild of America West, I'm Devra Maza. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank
Stay
you for having me.
safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.